Have anybody on? Do you want to join us over here?
That was fairly decisive.
Thank you. Okay.
You want us to join you over there?
That was fairly decisive as well.
Yes, I think so.
I think we can get started whenever you're ready, Jordan.
Anything else coming? There.
Yep.
We'll give it another minute or so to see if anybody else rolls in.
You certainly may. I'm kind of sprawling.
Hey, Chuck. How are you?
There's a cushy chair over there.
Oh, sorry, don't fall asleep. This is riveting stuff.
How can you
You
possibly
say
say
that.
that? All right, we're already started recording, right?
Yeah.
All right, we might as well start.
Okay,
Do you, well, first we should do, Neil would like to join our committee. We should recommend it to us to elect the board as the regular process.
Excellent.
Unless anybody has major objections to Gail joining. Yeah, can you go outside for that? Good thing nobody objected.
I can take.
So
Great.
let's call it a recommendation to the selectmen.
Mhm.
And we need to.
Do I need to nominate
We
Gail
probably
Marshall
should do
to
it grown up.
become a member of our LUZO committee?
All right,
I'll second it.
all right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? There we go, we'll recommend it.
Thank you.
all right,
Then we're up to you. You got
yes, all right, so on the agenda tonight, we had some subdivision discussion, LD 2003 related, LUZO amendment, and then other ordinance amendments and whatever else we want to talk about. So just to start off, the subdivision ordinance discussion, I've actually have a workshop scheduled with the planning board. For now, it is in December, no, November, December? December 20th. So we're gonna be having a workshop with the planning board to go over the subdivision ordinance. I'm also forwarding the draft, so everybody, there's no changes to the draft that we already looked at. I gotta forward that to Andy Hamilton tomorrow, and hopefully we'll circle back around on any updated changes.
And is that the one you sent to the planning board? Of the October 12th then?
Yep, it hasn't changed since then.
Okay.
Yep, so if before the planning board meeting, it does change, I'll send around an updated draft. All right. Any questions on subdivision? All right, so the next thing, I had sent around a memo to everybody, about the LUZO. The LD 2003 related changes,
Mhm.
and I thought we'd spend the majority of the time tonight going over those changes. So with the risk of being a little redundant in case anybody's actually read the memo. As we've talked about, LD 2003 does basically three things. One, it does more than three things, but for our purposes, it does three things. Establishes an affordable housing density bonus, which we are taking care of as part of the subdivision ordinance. So we've worked up a draft of that's going to go in the new subdivision ordinance. Probably need to have some tweaks to that, and then some discussion about whether or not any of the other workforce housing provisions in the subdivision ordinance need to kind of get carried over into that section or not. And so we need to have those discussions. That's part of what we'll be talking to the planning board about. So that really takes care of that change. The second one is requiring that multiple dwelling units be allowed on a lot, which we already do. So the town already allows multiple dwelling units on a lot. And the law says you can allow a single family dwelling unit, and then if you can't change the dimensional standards for each dwelling unit. So for example, you can't have a 20,000 square foot lot size for the first dwelling unit, and then a 1 acre minimum additional lot size for the second dwelling unit, and so on and so forth. So we more or less already do that. But there's a few tweaks that we're gonna have to make, which we'll talk about in a second. And then, the third one requires accessory dwelling units be allowed. We already allow accessory dwelling units, but we're gonna have to make some tweaks to that as well. So, any questions on the overview? All right, so skipping over the affordable housing one, since we're working on that in a different way. As I mentioned, the town already allows multiple dwelling units on a lot. But I wanted to talk to you guys about a couple of different things. Under the land use ordinance table, 3.4. There's that section on regulatory uses, and then the terminology that is used in this provision. In this table is not the same terminology as the way things are defined in the ordinance. So it says dwelling 1 and 2 family. The actual terminology is residential dwelling 1 family and residential dwelling 2 family. So we may need to make some tweaks just to be consistent with definitions.
Changing this to read differently.
Yeah, we're not changing the definitions, we'll be changing the table.
Okay.
So then the next question is, under that same column that says dwelling multiple. So the term in the ordinance is actually residential dwelling multi-family, which is actually a structure, not a multiple dwellings on a lot, right? So the question I'm asking, I just want to clarify with folks that the intent, the policy intent in the ordinance is to deal with this structure, like a multi-family structure and not multiple dwellings on a lot. Does that make sense? It's just a clarification, but it means that it does mean something.
So like a multi-family
Yeah, like, so to
structure
me,
would be apartment. Or,
a
duplex.
multi-family, yeah, structure is like an apartment building.
okay,
Yep,
as opposed to separate.
yep.
Yeah.
Does everybody have a copy of this memo, by the way? There it is.
Yes.
Just making sure you-
And the one before.
So the policy then is, I mean, for that first change, I'm just gonna have to make a tweak to the allowed uses table so that the terms are consistent with the definitions, so that we know when we go in that we're actually talking about a 1-family and a 2-family residential dwelling and a residential dwelling multifamily, which is a defined term. There's that change. And then, I have a question for, that we just need to clarify that, the shoreline commercial district is actually the only district that doesn't allow multi-family dwellings, and whether or not that is consistent with A, shoreline zoning, and B, the intent of the LD 2003, it's something I have to figure out. I'm gonna say no, it isn't, but I don't know for sure. So we may need to change that where it's in the table, it says
No.
multiple fund, just put a C there. Conditional use. The next one is, one thing that I'm working on. I think in this example that I added just like a column down at the bottom. Or in the table, for shared employee living quarters or shared accommodations. Typos, but that is, I need to just kind of get you guys a draft of what that looks like. But I think we're gonna add a table, we're gonna add a use to this table for those things. I mean, that'll be a proposal. Yeah, it should say shared accommodations or employee living quarters, but I think it got missed.
How is that gonna be different than a boarding house?
How, well, boarding house, it might be different, it might not. Boarding houses are only allowed in one location. Yep. Yes,
Going back to the multiple dwellings on one lot. Is there, a place in that to have a conversation about whether or not that can or should be seasonal rentals that get built under that provision?
I think that yes, and I think maybe the place to have that conversation is that, accessory dwelling units might be a place where you'd want to say, I'm not sure there's any provision in the law that says you can't do this, but accessory dwelling units, you could have that conversation about whether or not you tie those to short-term rentals, as well as whether or not you want to regulate the multiple dwelling units on a lot or multi-family dwelling units. Sure.
Did you already, multi-dwelling units, there's a provision for duplexes.
Yep.
And then the multi-dwellings doesn't sound like duplexes. Are you talking apartment buildings or?
Yeah, so what I think we need to do is change the ordinance. The way I understand the ordinance, and this is really a policy question for everybody, it's because again, I'm only trying to interpret what the town wants. But I think that the way it's been interpreted is that like the dwelling one and dwelling two are actually residential dwelling one family and residential dwelling two family. Those are, the ordinance thinks about them like structures. And so where it says dwelling multiple, what it really means is residential dwelling unit multifamily, which is also a structure. So multiple,
But that's
Right?
three.
it's three or more. It's three or more
Multi-families, three or more.
units. Yeah,
Two family is two.
yeah.
Okay.
So in my memo, if
In one
actually,
structure.
if it makes sense, yep, you can
Right.
go to the end, page 5 has the definitions kind of pulled out. So, a residential dwelling multifamily is a structure or a portion of a structure designed for human habitation that includes facilities for cooking, eating, and sleeping for 3 or more families. So it's a structure that has 3 dwellings or more in it.
Independent.
Should it say separate in cooking and,
I think you could we could consider changing, it's like an apartment building, but we could
Yeah.
actually change we could change the definition to just say multi-family dwelling or residential dwelling multifamily means a structure containing 3 or more dwelling units.
I think we should call it apartment building.
We could do that too. It's the same thing.
Well,
Yeah.
I feel like it reads to anybody.
well, a
Not
condo
really.
is not an apartment.
Or townhouse or,
A triplex.
Because an apartment building has more limited meaning,
could
in my
have
mind.
different
Apartment
stories.
What?
Apartment has a more limited meaning in my mind than the,
There's one owner, it's a landlord.
I think you want to allow multifamily dwelling units in different forms. An apartment being one form, a townhouse, or some other type of dwelling, like where there are 3 dwellings in one kind of structure. Or more, 3 or more.
I guess I'm just thinking of the language for the people, for say like when the town votes on it, that they understand that where they're voting.
Mhm.
And not thinking, oh yeah, people want in-law apartments,
Yep,
you know, and that it flags as, we're not talking about in-laws, this is apartment building.
they're individual
Right, but they're not just.
dwellings, so not a mother-in-law apartment that's attached to your house.
Whatever, but it's still, it's beyond, I don't view that as what I want in the next door to me in a residential neighborhood. I live next to a duplex that's rented out as apartments.
Mhm.
It's not great. I like having neighbors that care about where they live.
Is there any way they could rent it out and not, would they not be apartments if they weren't rented out?
If it was like an in-law apartment and a family, it
Yeah.
would feel much more like a neighborhood, but
So it's really just 2 buildings that are being rented out for short-term rentals.
they're attached, so it's.
Yeah.
And I rent out a duplex myself, you know, but it's a different thing in terms of trying to develop community and residential. I never connect with those neighbors because they rotate through every.
But I don't think the word apartment is gonna make a difference in that.
I'm not saying it has to be apartment, I'm just saying it should be a language that people know what they're agreeing to in a town.
yep, I think that's an interesting
Multi-family.
way to think about it.
I don't know.
Yep. So what I'm trying to clarify is a couple of things. One, that the new state law says you shall allow multiple dwelling units on a lot. And I have some questions about that. And then in the table of allowed uses, the distinction between dwelling multiple, which requires a conditional use permit, or what I think was meant was actually multifamily dwelling, which is a structure. And that has, like what you're saying, like it's certain, there's a different approval process you have to go through for that type of use. Like for a duplex and a single family unit, it's a code enforcement officer permit in most cases. But for a multifamily dwelling unit, it's a conditional use approval or subdivision. Is what it
So
is.
then you have to come to plan.
Yeah.
That is the thing.
But that's an interesting distinction. That's what I'm just trying to clarify.
Yeah,
Yep.
like I could think of, anyway.
Yep. So that does lead me to my next question on that issue, which is under 6B11(3), I want to try to clarify even more, and I'm not sure I got it quite right yet, but so on page 3 of the memo, I started this whole thing under we're not going to do about the budding more than one road yet, although that's coming down. That's a change. There's a tweaks there we have to make. But under number 2, perhaps reformatting this so that we have more clarity on all dimensional standards. All dimensional requirements shall be met separately for each and every one family dwelling unit on a lot. This is the same language. It's already in there. I'm just spacing it out. And then a version of this to say a residential dwelling 2-family shall be considered a single structure and all dimensional requirements shall be met separately for each and every 2-family dwelling on a lot. So for Kim, I'm just trying to further clarify that like a duplex or a residential dwelling 2-family is considered a single structure for the purposes of dimensional standards. So you don't have to meet setbacks from each unit. You don't have to meet that. And then I think we also have to clarify what we mean by residential dwelling multifamily, because those are structures too. So the way I think it's interpreted right now is you have to meet dimensional standards for each dwelling unit, but primarily it's lot area. You can't meet setbacks if you're in the same structure. So are we going to require, or can we require for multifamily units? So basically for dwelling units more than 3 dwelling units on a lot, can we require the dimensional standards times 3, basically, is the question. And I don't know how to do that yet. But I think that's the way it works now.
Would it make sense, understanding wise, to change it so that it read multifamily residential dwelling, 2-family residential dwelling, and a 1-family residential dwelling?
And just the definition?
No, just because one residential dwelling 2-family sounds like a number.
Yes.
But we could say 2-family residential dwelling.
Yeah, we could. It actually.
I don't know if it just makes it clear, that to my mind it does, but.
Yeah, I'm actually sort of struggling with the definition, like the terminology. I'm not struggling with the term. The terms I'm struggling with the definition, right?
Yeah.
So in the ordinance, there's something called a dwelling 1-family, a dwelling 2-family, and a dwelling multifamily. And then it just says see residential dwelling multifamily.
And you just want to, yeah.
I would like to try to figure out how to simplify all 4 of those terms into one term.
Well, I would
One.
be satisfied with a residential dwelling, comma, multifamily.
Mhm.
Then it doesn't sound like a title as much.
Right. Anybody else have thoughts on that, or we're getting down
I
deep
think
into?
they're okay the way they are.
Punctuation is good.
Yeah,
Yeah, comma's fine.
When you're talking about, needing to clarify, one single family, 1-family, 2-family dwellings are considered a single structure.
Yep.
you're just saying that there's a requirement that primary structures are 20 feet apart. Is that
There's,
pretty much the only one that you're thinking of, or is there another, like,
no, so I'm not trying to change the current policy unless everybody says the current policy doesn't work, but so I'm trying to do a couple of different things. One is be compliant with LD 2003, which says you have to allow multiple dwelling units on a lot, and you can't require more lot area for the second dwelling unit, or the third dwelling unit, or the fourth dwelling unit than you do the first one. So if you have like a 20,000 square foot minimum lot area for your first dwelling unit, you can't require a 40,000 square feet for the second one or the third one. It has to be consistent. Which we currently do, except that we allow a duplex basically on a property without being double the lot area. So I don't think we want to change that policy unless everybody says, no, that's wrong. We do want to change that policy. So I'm not trying to do that, trying to maintain that, but I'm also trying to figure out if maybe, and it's possible that I'm overthinking it because I really got deep into the weeds on trying to figure this out. But do we need to make it more clear that for every dwelling unit in a multi-family structure, you require the lot area for each dwelling unit? You know what I mean? Each unit requires a lot area of 20,000 square feet in that example. And then you have to write something that says, obviously if it's a single structure, the setbacks don't require, but if you have multi-family units on a lot, then the setbacks to the primary structures will apply.
I guess I'm not the setbacks are gonna be the setbacks, and I don't see.
Right, they're gonna be for the structure, not for the units. So what I'm trying to clarify is, does the town want me to figure out for for over 2 units, we want to make sure that the lot area applies to every
Separate units.
every separate unit?
Does LD 2003 want that?
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
I think if that's not what she signed that have, then that's gonna go against, we're gonna be more strict, we can't be.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I need to ask the state, and they're probably gonna not know the answer to this either. So, as I've said before, LD 2003 is actually pretty simple. It just requires you to do these things. It requires you to allow multiple units on a lot. It requires the other things I talked about, but it doesn't dictate like dimensional standards in most cases, except for in this one where it says you can't make the lot area more restrictive for the other units than you do for the first unit.
But doesn't it completely defeat the purpose of allowing multiple units on a lot if you say, yeah, that's fine, but it's gonna be 60,000 square feet rather than 20,000 square feet? I mean,
Yes.
that totally defeats the purpose of
Yep.
the legislation, so.
Yep, it doesn't defeat the purpose of the legislation. It might defeat the purpose of being able to have an apartment building on a lot that doesn't, 60,000 square feet. You could put 3 dwelling units on a lot that's 20,000 square feet
In one structure.
in one structure easily.
Can you do like the minimum lot area for the first one, and then cut the other ones like by a third?
I think you could be less.
Yeah.
Yep. We'd have to write it like, and this is, I'm not sure I'm articulating my question well enough, but if you were doing like a 3-lot subdivision, it's obvious that you have 3 lots. If you're doing it 3 units in a single structure, you still need to have the same area.
The same 3-lot area.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah, and if we don't think that you do, then I need to create something in this ordinance that makes that clear.
I would think that the whole point of allowing it is to not have to expand to that size.
Right.
I mean, because it's not gonna affect lot coverage if they're in one building,
No,
right?
which is the point you're getting
I
at,
think-
calling it structures instead of units.
Yes.
What about doing it by zone? Like going through the different, I guess it's,
Yep. Yep.
that's one of the things is the areas where we have the limit is larger lots, minimum of 3 acres or something. The intention is to allow for people who want to live in less dense area to live in less dense area and feel that they got that. So if you, but in town, you know, you're in the denser area, so allow it there, but say in the places where people have bought property because they want to be in a quiet location.
Yep.
And you have a different policy.
Everybody wants to be in a livable location, regardless whether or not they're in town or outside of what you might call a village in this island. My sense is that the whole, and I'm just spitballing here, is that the whole purpose of LD 2003 was to get people to, because of the cost, because of the overwhelming need for housing, that and because of the challenges to our communities, because not enough people can afford to live in them, in order to make them mobile communities, that it's encouraging us to think about density, even those of us who think that we get to be in a rural area and never see a neighbor, that to get us to think differently about density in the world that we're in now. And so I'm not sure I draw as bright a dividing line personally between somebody who bought in one district versus another district. I don't think that's. I don't know that it helps us going forward in terms of how we define what we want our communities to be like.
The lot size in the different
Yes,
areas would still be the same, and the same requirements would apply, but you could actually build a 3-family unit on a
yeah,
3-acre lot. Which would,
Which you could do today.
right,
So what I perceive, I mean, the law, and we can read the law, but I think LD 2003 really just, it does talk about density, and it does talk about making sure that you can't limit the number of units that are on the property, or you have to you have to allow accessory dwelling units. But it doesn't say specifically anything to do with dimensional standards. It really, because I think it recognizes that the town, through its comprehensive planning process, or a town, has different dimensional requirements depending on where you are in town. But it does make you, a community, think about density in the sense that you have to allow more than one dwelling unit on a lot, or you can't just, what we did for the ADUs is tied it to a conforming lot, which we're not allowed to do anymore, so we have to take that out. But you have to just allow those things by matter of, they're just gonna be allowed multiple units on a lot, but Mount Desert already does all of those things. We just need to tweak them to make it more consistent. But I think in doing this research, what has come up for me was, it's not that clear in our ordinance for a structure that is considered a multifamily structure, what is the minimum lot area per dwelling unit? Right now, I think we interpret it by being, whatever the minimum lot area is times the number of units that you want. That's what it's gonna be. My question is much more, should it be that way? And should we take this opportunity that LD 2003 has given us and actually rethink whether or not, that is necessary, in some situations. So maybe I'll just throw the rural woodland 5 district, because the goal of that district is to protect larger areas, and it's a resource area for watersheds and whatnot. Maybe you don't want to do, maybe you want to continue to require every dwelling unit to be tied to a lot size, but as Meredith was saying, maybe in the village residential, you want to say, you want to make sure you have a 10,000 square foot minimum lot size, but for every dwelling unit, it can be 5,000 square feet or whatever it is. I don't know. I was just happen to be looking at clusters. So, but
maybe you can do do the minimum lot size in the zone it's in, and not require additional minimum lot area if it's in a single building. But if you start to spread out and create buildings, then you're looking at lot coverage, erosion, tree removal, know, maybe, and then require maybe minimum lot areas for the additional units, but maybe not having to meet the minimum, maybe cut it in half, or maybe a third, like I mentioned.
Yep,
I think that makes sense, Kim, because I think that makes a lot of sense. We're trying to create, I think we're trying to create more housing. And we already have a lot of existing lots, and I think by not allowing that exception or whatever, however you want to term it. You're gonna have a lot of lots that can't fall into this except for, if maybe it's a new subdivision that can, but anything that's existing, it might be difficult to do that. Unless you allow for, more, you have to have more acreage or whatever for the second lot, if it's, like you said, one structure.
Yeah.
yeah, because I think one of the things that I heard through some of these community meetings is there are structures you could drive through. I think Seal Harbor was one that pops out in my mind for some reason, but there are structures that are big enough to have more than one dwelling unit in them, but the lot area doesn't allow you to have multiple dwelling units. And so why,
Yeah.
and if it's on a town sewer system or whatever, like what's the harm in having? My question is, in those areas in particular, what's the harm in having multiple dwelling units in a single structure?
And the one thing that came up in one of the last projects was all the parking issues that go along
Yep,
with putting more units on a lot.
sure, and I think parking needs to be on the table for our discussion also. I'm super resistant to it, but it's gonna have to happen.
How many units are in that Acadia Court building in Seal Harbor?
Great question, I don't know.
It does seem like the areas that have larger acreage, it is, I mean, that's why you have cluster housing, is the recognition of that we need to preserve our environment, not just provide housing.
Yeah,
And that if you let multiple people, I mean, I can imagine that there are some mansions around here that have plenty of room to have 3 units, and that would make sense to discuss somehow, but at the same time, like, those to not require more space, need for more parking, which is all destruction of the open land and the environment, that there are plenty of people who in this town that really value that as well.
yeah, so I mean, what do you think about the idea of looking at all the zones and making decisions by zone?
I think that's.
Yep.
I think you're also height limitations too. You're gonna try to go up and put more people and kind of encourage more of the one building, 2 building, you gotta allow more height.
Yeah, I would like to just open
for the
it's
exception,
not
sure.
encouraging, it's just saying we're doing things to allow people to get more housing in town in different ways is what I think that's the goal we're trying to achieve, right? That's what you were talking about.
No,
Yeah.
and, but that gets back to the fact that I asked a question a while ago about these multiple dwellings and seasonal rentals, and I didn't hear you. You said, yes, you could discuss it in that context. I didn't hear any takers. So I don't know where we're at on that, but if we can't talk out of both sides of our mouth on that, if we are trying to encourage housing, we're trying to encourage housing, we're not trying to encourage the use of property as essentially businesses.
Those are 2 separate issues, I think.
No, I did 2 separate issues,
And,
but you can't do A without
Doing B,
grappling.
but that's sort of what the people that are working on the new commission, what did we get stuck with last year?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Short-term rental,
Yeah,
the new group is starting work on it.
Sure.
That's gonna be where that's gonna get dealt with.
yeah, you could deal with it.
Yeah.
in
That's
that.
a catch-22 too, because there are plenty of people who can't live here unless they rent out that little cabin. Yeah, that's what enables people to live here, is that they have a rental unit. And it would be nice if like a lot of the accessory dwellings or something were a seasonal rental, that the person who wanted to live here year round bought the property and did seasonal rentals that brought them in enough money so they could afford it.
In theory, that's correct, but we have no way of testing the accuracy of that theory, because we have no data, we have no information. about who owns these properties and who actually is using them so that they can pay their property taxes and that they can continue to live here. We all know, and some people have been folks who rent their property out in the summer, and even, we all know people who move into campgrounds to rent out their properties, and they've long done that here and in other places like this. And that's different, very possibly, than what's going on now. Are we helping our community if more people are buying up these properties and renting them out? Are we helping a sense of community? We have no way of knowing because we have no information yet, no data.
And there are people that are buying, that live on the island, that are buying other properties and renting them out short.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily qualify as somebody who's struggling to stay here.
Correct.
Around. And that's a whole nother group of people. I understand people that go to camp and rent their house over the summer has always happened, and that I understand their need. But people that are buying up multiple properties and then just renting them out while still living in their personal house are a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, I don't know how, it just, every time the issue comes up, I'm like, how do you not run off people that are part of this community? Because you say you're not allowed to do seasonal rentals anymore, and they say, well, I can't afford to live here, I have to move away then. You know, like, I can't afford my property, that's how I.
Well, part of the issue's always been that if you're gonna do seasonal rentals, you have to live on the property.
Correct.
Oh, the other 9 months of the year would qualify you as a resident.
Do we have that?
Not yet.
Or
No, that's all down in the thing, but if you're a resident of the town, you have to spend 180 days here, is it?
182 or
182.
183.
And so if you have a house and you have to rent it, you have another 200 some odd days to rent it,
Right.
and then you can come back. And that's what people have traditionally done.
Yeah.
They go up to camp, spend the summer and then come back.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with that. That makes sense to me. If you have, and if you live on a property and you have another building that you rent, that's fine with me. But if you're,
what about, not to go down too far down the storm road, but you have a summer house that is not winterized, has seasonal water, and the family is renting it out for 2 months, so the family can hold on to, so that they can pay their property taxes. And the family only comes for 1 month a year, but they can't afford to keep their third generation family summer home.
I think
It can't be
that's a different issue.
Yeah.
Again.
So I'd like to put a pin in this conversation because it is a really nuanced conversation, as we know, having gone through it. And there is work being done on that issue. That does not negate the question
Right.
about certain things that you may be doing to add, we'll say, add opportunities for additional housing units in town. So I don't want to shortchange that conversation. What I would like to do is maybe parse that out in a few different ways. Like the first question is, what things do we need to do in the land use ordinance that appropriately for the town of Mount Desert add and make it easier to build more and different types of housing units is really what we're getting at. So it doesn't matter who owns it or how it gets built or what you use it for, like that's focus on that issue. And then ask the question, well, all right, out of any of these opportunities, are there things that we want to do to say these bonuses, these opportunities really should be geared toward year-round housing or whatever? Like, can we maybe think about them in those two ways? Because what the law doesn't do, the law does not distinguish between who owns it or how it gets used. It just says, it just throws out a net and says, we want communities across the state to make sure that you allow the maximum number of housing units on any lot. So it's essentially getting rid of any single family zoning that's allowed. It's making sure that everybody has the ability to, if they choose to put an accessory dwelling unit on a property. And it is also requiring communities to allow for higher density bonuses for, they call it affordable housing projects, but we call it workforce housing.
But we know that this law was not designed to be a boon to the building industry. It was designed for a public purpose, which was to provide access to housing for residence for members of the community, and there's lots of different ways to do that.
Yep.
But we can't separate out completely. What you're trying to do is deal with the technical aspects of what the public policy factors are.
Yep.
And I think this town's responsibility is to grapple with the public policy issues of what, and, you know, the definition of what it means to build and have a viable and successful year-round community, assuming that that's a common goal of the residents here. And then we take them there. But I will say this, one thing about this conversation that I think has been illustrated is that we can't make these decisions by anecdote. We can't make these decisions about what about the person who does this, what about the person who does that, what about the person who does this. We have to have a much more comprehensive look at what our goals are, what we're trying to do here in the community. And I agree, it's not just this committee who's,
Yeah,
or even all this committee is charged with figuring that out. But
right, but I think it's a really relevant conversation, and he would urge all of you to participate in the comprehensive plan process. Not that it is like, it is a longer process, but these are pretty heady.
Yeah.
And those are issues that are gonna come up in the
They
comprehensive plan.
absolutely need to come up in the comprehensive plan. If I was to say, like, the three things that you need to work on in Mount Desert, well, two of the few things that you need to do on your updating your plan will be to talk about housing policy for the town and to think about your economy more year round. That's
Has
it.
that committee been created yet?
Nope.
Oh,
Not that I'm aware of. I think we just had two people maybe were appointed yesterday.
There've been a couple applications. then.
Yeah. But we're already working on the background stuff, but like starting at the beginning of January, that's gonna be like the next 12-month planning process.
so that's not gonna help us now, we're trying to get something, to
No.
town meeting for
Nope.
the LD 2003.
Yep, but I think it's an important question, and I would say, as I've said before, like your land use ordinance is a living document. We change it all the time because we are faced with things, in this town in particular is faced with things that are just things that are bananas that we can never interpret or try to plan for, but I think if I'm summarizing, Gail, of your point well enough, it is that there's a public policy discussion that needs to happen related to the application of some of these opportunities that we're trying to put in the ordinance. But what we're gonna do now is the technical element of it, which is to say, we have to do some of this. And when I'm reading through the ordinance, in order to make sure that we're compliant with LD 2003, this whole thing about multifamily units kind of pops into my brain, and I'm like, it's not that clear in the ordinance how to deal with it. And I don't think you get a lot of multifamily unit applications, but we should be thinking more about that. And there are locations in town where it doesn't make any sense to require every unit to have the same lot area that you would, like, just to have that lot area, when you should be thinking about it like a little differently. And so, yeah, I think we have to make a change there somehow. So the minimum lot sizes could be the same, and you could treat it like multifamily unit. Like you do, like it's already kind of in the
There
ordinance.
is just with a different name.
Yeah, because we're probably gonna take out the workforce subdivision piece and we'll just call it something else.
No, have you looked at any other towns that, you know, kind of similar to us that may have already?
Yep, I started to do that. I haven't found any good examples yet, but I just started to do it. Yeah, I have to do that more. Yep. The other thing I was looking at is in the ordinance where, in the table of allowed uses, is where actually it calls cluster and workforce housing an allowed use. Like, I think we should just take that out. Because they should just be, they're not uses that
No, they're not.
need to be in the table. They're still residential.
Mhm.
So anyway, I digress.
Why subdivision, right? Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't need to be in the allowed use table. I don't know why it's there. Well, I do know why it's there. I get the history of it.
are we
Trying to-
talking about the lot size versus?
Right now, where I think we're heading, if I'm reading the room correctly, is I could go back to my office and draft something up that deals with multi-family structures and the lot area that will be required per unit, and we'll do it based on zone.
In the state's guidance in 2003, the brochure that they handed out, they said additional units may not require more land area per unit than the first unit.
Yeah.
So you can't do, one unit requires 10,000, two unit requires 30,000, three units require 50,000. You can do, one unit requires 10, two units require, may up to 20,000, and three units 30,000.
Yep,
So
So they're saying 10, I mean, it's.
which is what we,
if one unit requires 10, then.
Right.
Then you can use the
Then you
same
can-
sometimes,
you can
times
do that
whatever.
same-
Yeah.
we already do that.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying is the challenge is gonna be that for a duplex, we allow less than the minimum lot area. So it's essentially half the minimum lot area, if you think about it per dwelling unit.
That was something that came up. That was in recent scenarios. Could you have I could understand that the towns allowed for two families on a single family lot, but there are lots of scenarios where a family could want a second dwelling unit. Whether it's an accessory dwelling or whether you make a duplex,
Mhm.
that is very residential. Does our code allow you to build a duplex and then additionally an accessory dwelling?
No.
Okay, because I was like that, I don't think was what,
No,
I think the intent was to allow
yep,
for in-law apartments and people to have rentals. so
Yes.
They can live here, like the two is about facilitating people living.
yep, so you're jumping ahead a little bit,
We
but
got-
that's,
We know what the intent is, but the
So-
wording is questionable.
so the
Okay.
other,
It's written.
yeah, so the third thing that the law requires is to allow everybody to have a residential dwelling, accessory dwelling unit, which we already do. But we need to clarify in the ordinance that it is in areas where you have a single family dwelling, you're allowed an accessory dwelling, not if you have a duplex or a multifamily, you don't get an accessory dwelling for each unit,
Yeah.
essentially.
You get.
So-
Yeah, who fights over it? I gotta
Well,
do
the way-
it, and I won't have it yet, my neighbor.
Right, there's no way to, everybody would have to get one.
Yeah.
But it's, so in this draft, I've already sorted that out. So I'm just telling everybody that,
Trying to make it clear.
yeah, what I was just confirming with the room, that when the town came up with the idea to allow accessory dwelling units, it was intended to be for lots that have single family structures and not for other structures. And I think we're all in the room when that happened. And so I just wanted to make sure that that's the case. And so what we're gonna do then is change the rule, change the language just to be more clear that that's what's meant. And the other thing was, the law has a minimum size for an accessory dwelling unit. So I added that in. Ours is, so it's 190 square feet is the minimum, and then our maximum was 75% of the principal structure, I didn't change. And then I just added a few other things for clarity purposes that are more reflective of what LD 2003 says.
I
That's
have a
it.
question.
Yes.
If the 2003 is providing all these other avenues to put more dwellings on a lot, and the town preceding that set up a situation where you can do a duplex. I don't know the instance, I'm not advocating for anything. Is there a reason to think about whether or not we need to say, well, 2003 takes care of the multiple dwellings, so we can remove that duplex provision, and in return, you're gonna get all of these options? And not have it be cumulative? I don't know if there's a reason to do that or not, I'm just.
Yep, I think that, yeah, I mean, you could be very simple about it and say for every dwelling unit on a lot, this is the lot area that you need. Or, and a lot of towns actually, that I was just doing some other when I was doing some research on this, I noticed other towns have the same, like duplex. Or is the same, in the same column, like these are allowed as these things. So,
Is multi-defined in the, LD 2003?
yeah, that was in the bottom, that definition right there, that I said alternative definition on page 5.
Oh, yeah.
That's actually comes right from the
That's
text,
the same as what we have,
kind of,
3 of them. No,
It's
I
not three of
didn't
them.
know if multi meant 2. That's
nope,
LD.
nope. They have they have a different definition for like a two-family dwelling, not very different.
Yeah.
But
Does it have?
I didn't know if, like, again, I'm not
connector?
trying to go in and like totally change policy direction here for that particular thing, but the duplex that we allow is 2 families. But it isn't necessarily in the same structure. It's actually could be in a structure that's connected by a 12-foot
One
breezeway.
building, regardless,
Right.
it's connected,
Because that's the way we defined it.
yeah.
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 And again, I
I
don't
think
know.
there's a reason to have in the definition, just, that, of the difference between multi-family and duplex.
Absolutely.
Because I think, any residential kind of person might want to put, whether it's an accessory dwelling or have a duplex on their own personal property. But as soon as you go to more than 2, it doesn't feel, so it just requires me more scrutiny, more opportunity for the community to weigh in on it, that's the sort of breaking point, that is like, no, you can have 2 units,
Mhm.
but once you go to 3, it just should chip to a, comes to planning board, meaning has an opportunity to review it, that it's not just residential. That means one person owns property, so more than 50% of properties rented.
Yep. So
Inherent.
the ordinance would still be probably a conditional use approval, because you could do like, hey, I just had a duplex and then 5 years from now, I'm gonna put another structure on my property and then another structure. That's a conditional use approval.
But that
Not
just
a-
requires a little more scrutiny, and that's all I'm saying is. So I think that breaking point between 2 versus multi is important to have.
Sure.
I guess what I wanna get back to my question about. I just wonder if we're creating a lack of clarity about what we allow, by keeping the pre-existing duplex language. Plus then having all these other new, three permitted uses. Have we created a coherent whole in terms of what we will allow?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to clarify under at least one of the changes, that it makes it more clear, but. My answer would be that we are not adding a lot of new things because of LD 2003. We already allow all those things. Yep, there's fundamentally, from a policy perspective, LD 2003 does not, in the town of Mount Desert. There's nothing new, there's no new concepts that we don't already do. Like, we already allow accessory dwelling units.
Do they?
Yeah, but you only allowed it within the lot, meets the minimum lot size, so now you're taking that away and
Yep.
just saying anybody that has a single family dwelling
Yes,
can have one.
there, but from a policy, from a high level perspective, that's not a new concept. Like accessory dwelling units in some communities in Maine is a totally new concept. In some zones, you can't not have them.
Yeah,
But we
like
don't-
I was saying, right now, we limit it to only if you meet the minimum lot area.
Yep,
So if I have 1.5 acres and I'm in 2 acre zoning, I can't have an accessory residential dwelling
Right.
unit.
and this,
So this will
Yep.
do away with that and allow anybody that has, with the exception of the
Right,
shoreline.
but you still have to
I haven't
meet,
got an answer on that yet, but,
yep, but you still have to meet lot, coverage requirements.
Oh,
You
yeah.
still have to meet
yep, I get
setbacks.
that, I
Yep.
get that.
Are you asking, is it out to the state you're on shoreline? We don't allow shoreline to have accessory dwelling.
No, not, you have to meet the dimensional requirement, all the dimensional requirements to have the second dwelling in the shoreline zone, even a duplex.
So, and is this new provision gonna require that the shoreline?
I haven't asked, well, I sent an email down to the state and I haven't heard back from them. I asked them how does this LD 2003 affect development in the shoreline zone?
My sense is, right now, it's the same. It doesn't really matter. Even in shoreline zoning, you can have multiple dwelling units on a lot.
But you have to meet.
You
the
just have to
dimensional
meet all the
requirements
lot,
times
the dimensional
two, or
standards.
three, whatever, right,
Yep,
but inland you don't
nope.
for the
So
accessory.
anything outside of 250 feet, although Our rules say if you are
It's
partially
wholly a
within,
partial,
yeah,
so it
Yeah.
affects the whole lot.
it does affect a lot of lots.
So the new standard that's statewide, it isn't saying all single-family dwelling lots are allowed to have an accessory dwelling, and you're not allowed to tell them they've got to have enough land to have a whole nother
No,
lot.
it is saying that any lot that has a single family dwelling where housing is allowed. Shall have the ability to have an accessory dwelling unit.
But you're not sure if that applies to shoreland, if
It
that's
does,
what it
there's
said?
actually a little thing in and it must also comply with shoreline zoning. But that's like,
Which means,
Oh, which is
you have to meet
contradictory.
the current shoreline zoning, it's not saying that it applies there, I mean, they still want you to meet whatever dimensional requirements of shoreline zoning.
yeah, it's really,
Oh,
it's,
So if
it's,
you want a duplex, you gotta meet the lot size times two,
Mm.
shore frontage if you have it times two.
yeah, it's kind of confusing, but not really. If you think about LD 2003, it just says. These things you need to allow, these kinds of housings you need to allow. You cannot have zoning that only allows for single family dwellings on a lot. You have to allow accessory dwelling units, and you shall allow a density bonus for workforce housing or affordable housing projects that meet these criteria. That's it. And it doesn't say, to do that, you have to change your lot area requirements or your setbacks for structures or your shoreline zoning rules, like it just. Now you go figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
That's
They,
pretty much
they
what
give
it
you a
says.
dimensional
You go how
standard.
to, you
They
figure
don't
out how to
want
make
your
it work.
ordinance to do it, put it in it, but you figure out
Yeah,
the dimensional requirements.
so like the confusing part to me I mean, again, I have relevant recent experience on affordable housing projects. And if you took any affordable housing project and multiply the density times 2.5, which you can do, like, how do you make that fit? Like the number of units that you might be allowed might not be the number of units that you're allowed to have on a property because of all these other requirements. You know, you still have to meet lot area, you still have to meet lot coverage, you still have to have setbacks and blah, blah, blah. So there's like, you're gonna have to think about how to apply that density bonus to the maximum. You know, it might not always be the case that you can get 2.5 times because of the other constraints, which are fine, but I'm just saying, it's like, it doesn't immediately mean every property can all of a sudden have 2.5 times the density, because there's a lot that goes into that thought, that development. Yeah, I wish I was doing a better job of explaining it. I actually think about it a lot, so I'm positive I'm not doing a very good job of simplifying it right now. But I think if you can just think about LD2, I do not want to minimize the importance of LD 2003. It is a really important rule. But if you think about it for Mount Desert, we already do the things that, principally, we already do the things that the law requires. We just need to tweak some of those policies in order to be more compliant with what it's asking us to do. And it's not a huge deal. Where the spinoff comes is, you know, again, the multifamily dwelling unit thing, and I just start to read the ordinance and see ways that things don't kind of line up, which makes me think we ought to just scrap the whole thing and start over again at some point, but that's a longer.
Let's do it.
That's not what we're doing. We're gonna continue the patchwork. Anyway. On principle, I mean, obviously, we're gonna wanna see like how it all shakes out, but in the memo that I provided, like that is a draft. A start of what the warrant articles are gonna look like. So does that make sense? Great. And we'll continue to have more discussions about it. Yep. So the other thing about tonight, I did wanna, unless we wanna talk more about LD 2003. I had another question that is, I haven't drafted this yet, but I really wanna get rid of section 6A1 in the land use ordinance. And I don't know how to do that yet, but I'd love to have that conversation. We're gonna have that conversation with the planning board, so I'm just prepping
That's our
this group.
density and visual.
Yeah, 6A1 is the compatibility section of the ordinance, which says proposed use shall be compatible with the permitted uses within the district in which it is located as measured in terms of its physical size, visual impact, proximity to other structures, and density of development. So my experience and professional judgment on this is it's a very subjective standard, and it creates a lot of confusion, particularly in situations where the applicant or the property owner might think one thing and then people around them might think another thing. So trying to figure out a way to capture the intent of what that is, while also not having so much subjectivity in that particular standard. And I guess I'm just sort of running through the concept with everybody. And if everybody says, nope, we love that section and we don't want you to touch it, I will stop thinking about it. But my perspective is that there are things in this section that are already should have been discussed, like the proposed use shall be compatible with the permitted uses in the district in which it is located. That's already dealt with in the table of allowed uses. Otherwise, you wouldn't have those allowed uses.
Yeah.
That are allowed in that zone. Like you have to, that's the first test of any application is what, hey, is this thing that I want to do allowed in the zone that I'm in? So the legislative body should have already decided it was compatible at that point. And then the second one, now if you're measuring it in terms of physical size, we have dimensional standards that deal with physical size. Visual impact, not so much. Proximity to other structures, you have setbacks between structures and setbacks between lot sizes, so those things have already theoretically been decided. And density of development, that is the stuff that we were just talking about. So lot area, things that are
why. Here in the comprehensive plan, used to have I think it was in the plan, it was the scenic vistas clause.
that might have been, I remember that.
That was a long time ago, but it was just as ambiguous, and it was planning work, because we spent about a year going around and cataloging scenic vistas and what qualified and what didn't, and we finally realized.
Yep,
It's impossible.
that should have
Everybody
been in
thinks
the
it's a-
comp plan. Those should be in the comp plan. But,
But this is the same kind of.
yeah. So,
I will just say, as in all of my years on the planning board, that, and I know Gail doesn't agree with me on this, but I do believe that maybe the specific criteria isn't the best, but I feel like it's are you being considerate of your neighbors?
mhm,
You know, are you being a good neighbor? That is the one category that we review that opens up the opportunity to say, you're being an asshole. You know, like, just try to be a little more considerate of everybody else, you know, what about your next door neighbor, you're walking with you, you know, no, it isn't a code, but you would be a nicer person if you didn't.
And how often has that had a positive effect?
I'm always saying that's what our job is,
But how often is it bringing that up to actually make a difference in what the people wanted to do?
all the time. Most of the time, people are nice neighbors. They are interested in being nice neighbors, and we have conversations all the time of saying, could you adjust this just to be a little more considerate of the neighbors? And more vegetation is put up, or things are adjusted just by opening up that conversation of, are you being considerate of your neighborhood?
yep,
Let me just go on the record and say, I am totally in favor of expecting people to be considerate of their neighbors. Where I get into the difficulty is in thinking that as a planning board member, I have a right somehow, because of that job, to dictate outside of the parameters of the planning of the LUZO and other relevant statutes, what people can and can't do based upon some fairly amorphous sense of what I think, or a neighbor thinks should or should not happen. The job of a planning board member is to interpret the LUZO and apply it. And I think that we've witnessed with respect to compatibility, I think that the language of compatibility isn't necessarily so bad. If you say, if your lens is this particular application a permitted use anywhere in that district? As opposed to, it's not a permitted use that immediate neighbors are going to like. Those are two different criteria, and 6A1 does not allow for that second interpretation to be taken. And I think that's where my limited view so far has been where there's been difficulty in using 6A1 to give abutters or other people in the community the chance to stop someone from doing what the ordinance allows them to do. And so in that sense, I agree with you. But I also think I've been confused watching how it's been interpreted to apply to applications for it. I don't think that specifically in our last meeting, somebody was in a butter who said, can I just get, well, this was the land and government, so can I just get you to agree as a condition of the permit that you'll plant vegetation? And you're happy to do that, but I wonder about the parameters of the planning board creating conditions of a permit. Yeah, you want people to be happy, but we did nothing about defining what the vegetation was gonna be, what was actually needed to make people happy. We just kind of like threw in this provision, yeah, you gotta do some vegetative screening. We didn't even realize, I don't think that, I mean, you looked at that site, there's a property up here, and then there's a slope, and then the project is down here. So what kind of vegetation are you actually gonna be requiring? Ponderosa pines or some burning bush or something? I mean, we just sort of do stuff like that, and I think I do have concerns about that, that maybe, but I'm one person.
Right.
You know.
So I think the way I've been thinking about it is trying to figure out a better way to have both of those things be more appropriately applied.
Mhm.
So that in sections there is the ability to say, you know, if you're talking about a vegetative screening, since you brought it up as an example, you know,
Right.
that there's something in the ordinance that, you know, there's some standards, because you want people to like,
Mhm.
you're gonna get into situations where people are gonna push back, and not everybody's gonna be friendly, so you wanna have a set of standards.
Right.
But I think that there are ways in other sections of 6A, for example, that you can ask those kinds of questions that don't just have this one blanket section in the ordinance that allows you to just do, you know, whatever. I think that's what 6A1 does.
And I think it's unfortunate because we recently did get off the rails inappropriately, I felt, on the issue of compatibility. But I don't, in all of the time, I feel like that's only happened that one time, that it's generally been a good conversation.
Yeah,
Ordinance, and the offering when a neighbor says, hey, I have a concern, are you gonna plant vegetation to block things out? And the applicant says, yeah, no problem, we'll plant some vegetation. And we say, okay, you agreed to plant some vegetation.
Mhm.
There's no definition. If the neighbor comes back and says, they didn't plant enough vegetation and it's not tall enough, say, well, we didn't define it. They planted some dandelions in between. You know, but it showed up, rather than turning to the neighbor who says, hey, you know, can you do something about the visual blocking, that we turn around and say, you know, no, we're not allowed to enforce anything. You're just gonna have to live with whatever they come at you.
Right.
It created peace, like everybody felt good about the fact that we said, yeah, you're asked to provide some
Yep.
visual buffering, and that's all we needed.
Yep.
Everybody was happier.
So I'm not negating that. The principle of that, when you're going to a planning board and having a conversation, you do open yourself up as an applicant to having a larger conversation than you would if you just went to the CEO and got a regular permit, but. I think 6A1 has kind of been on the hit list for many years. It's not just this year. It's just something that keeps popping up in my mind. And I really do think there are sections in the ordinance where you want to add that. Discussion point versus having a section that is, just a blanket. Well, not quite sure how we feel about this, but it doesn't feel compatible for these reasons. It is already compatible for many of the reasons that are listed in the ordinance, otherwise it wouldn't be there. But if you're talking about things like vegetation or lighting or things that are gonna be more neighborly, I think that's where we can be more creative.
Rather than it having you have to fill out an application to come to the planning board. And it seems to me that there's just requirements to provide the information. Whether it can be it's not a standard that is met, but a requirement that the applicant provides some descriptions of how they see their project as compatible. And it's not a pass or fail, but it just would require the applicant to say, I do feel like what I plan to do is compatible with my neighborhood visually, density wise, give them some things. It's basically like saying an essay, like all we're asking is that when you propose to do this project, you're going to have to prove to us that you put thought into being a nice neighbor.
So I don't want to be argumentative about it, but I feel like that already happens.
Yes.
That automatically already happens. I mean, I'll put my applicant hat on and say, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, how does this work? And if you use the most recent example of this, that one's interpretation of how we're compatible is not the same as another person's interpretation. So then you're gonna get into a situation where there's no standard to judge that. So I guess what I'm saying is.
It's just a requirement
Yeah.
for some verbiage and there's no pass or fail, but
And,
it's just a.
My recommendation would be to try to figure out. If the town wants to allow some discussion points in the ordinance, which I think is great. I mean, it's fine to go in and have a discussion like, oh, wow, I've never been through an application process where it doesn't usually come out better when you've had some discussion, because you can't always think about the things like the vegetation, the screen parking at the at the planning board meeting last time, like that. Oh, yeah, of course, we're happy to do that. They never thought about it. But I think you can put those things in other standards and not have a standard that's so broad. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
Can I ask you about?
Although it doesn't matter, I mean, again, it's not really up to me. I'm happy to.
So I have to look at the same standards that you guys do, planning board members, when I issue permits. And physical size. I look at ideally the neighborhood. When I issue a permit, so you said physical size is really addressed by setbacks and. But not really, what if you're in a neighborhood that allows a residential storage building. Structure that we just added to the ordinance.
Yep.
And you have someone that's got a vacant lot and they're proposing 2,400 square foot residential storage building. And I have my house. And I wanna build a garage, but no, just a 24 by 24. Are you okay with a big 2,400 square foot residential storage building next to you?
I would say, is the town okay with that?
Is that compatible?
Should we create a standard
area?
that says you can't have a residential storage building that's any bigger than
Well,
X?
that's what, I think there should be physical size limitations.
Then we should put a physical size
Right.
limitation on the residential
So
storage.
that's one of my examples that
Right, because I might say, yeah, that's 100% compatible. I'm totally fine with that.
So, well, I mean, I suppose the neighbors could appeal it, but I'm just saying that. Based on compatibility, yeah, physical size, well, like I said, I look at, when I issue permits, the neighborhood.
Yep.
And if I can't find a building that big, I'm like, you gotta tell me why you feel this is compatible.
I think we should do the work to determine the size, then compatibility ahead of time. Like my goal, my ultimately, when you get to the planning board, you've already done all the work, like the town has done the policy work
Yes,
of deciding these things are allowed, this is the dimensional things that we want to make sure, this neighborhood is, these things are allowed in these districts, here's the setbacks and blah, blah, blah. When you get to the planning board part, it really is, there's some discussion, but if you've already done all the work to make sure you're complying with the ordinance, it shouldn't be that, you know, I know that's a little idealistic, but there shouldn't be much wiggle room there. If it is, it's all right there. You have to check these boxes in order to even get an approval. So
because,
there's some,
that's right, because otherwise, what you have is a planning board making policy.
right,
And that's not the job of the planning board. The planning board is there to implement the policy, which is to be determined by the legislative body of the town, which is town meeting.
yes, the planning board
As,
should be held.
as passed in the ordinances, and that's the concern that I have. About. The planning board saying, well, maybe you should do this, or maybe you should do that.
Yeah.
But I have another example of your compatibility thing. Remember when I built my house, right? The first plans for my house were what? Here we are, like right there at the edge of the historic district in Somerville, and I've got this modern shed roof design, like boom, like single plane roof. And
Thank God you've got trees in front of it now.
I planted those purposely to get rid of you. And, and I struggled with that for a while. I had to go back to my architect and say, you know what? I can't do this
Yeah.
right here because I have to respect the vernacular that it's gonna be a modern building. And I'm not gonna change that, but I wanna put that big window in the center and I want a gable roof. And I had to fight like hell with an architect for that because they get their attitudes. And, but I felt in the end, like it was a gesture to the vernacular of the community. Kim didn't say anything to me until after I changed it, and said, oh, I'm so glad you did that. I mean, Kim was trying to tell me, you know, that's.
I can't, no, I mean, I.
You know,
it's white and green.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna say, you didn't even paint it white.
right. I didn't say it right, that's right, because we're on that end of town, we're not, it's not required.
Anything goes down there.
Anything, yeah, it's the law,
It's not required, it's not.
Oh, riffraff.
Right.
Yeah,
But also
it's
speak
tough.
truth.
It's tough to strike a balance between,
Yes.
you know, like I said, I've never been through a big project where going through a planning board meeting or whatever, it hasn't resulted in some decisions that were better for the project.
Right.
So it's a slippery slope between that and what you're talking about.
And I've also had the neighbors just come out with their pitchforks and just not like the person that's applying.
Yep.
And for no legitimate reason, tell them that they can't do it. I mean.
Right, so I guess what I'm trying to get at for 6A1, and we may or may not get to it this year, but I'm just sort of putting it on notice, is that we ought to be taking the things from that section and putting them in areas that are more appropriate, rather than having a section of the ordinance that just gives somebody the blanket ability to just turn down a project because it's not compatible.
We always stumble with it
Yeah.
anyway. We always have a hard time getting through that
Yeah, that's
section.
my least favorite part of 6A. It's tough, and it really putting your applicant hat on, like that, there is thought that goes into that in every application. But what's compatible to one is not always compatible to the other person.
I think you're trying to define the compatibility, but not leave it up to judgment, people's judgment.
I think, yeah, that's what I'm saying, is in many areas, you've already defined compatibility, but then there are some areas where we need to be more specific in what we mean by compatibility, like Kim's example.
Yeah.
Yep,
It's like the Bar Harbor, board that approves.
we tend to design review board. We don't
Design
need that.
review board.
I'm not suggesting that at all.
No, I know, I'm suggesting that not up
Yeah,
here.
right, that will
Well,
not
it used to
appear.
have character of the neighborhood,
Yes. Oh,
That's
my God.
do you remember that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Who's like, okay, what's the character of the neighborhood?
which
So then-
changes all the time.
So to get rid of this, then Kim, when you run into somebody who wants to put up a massive warehouse, just store their toys, in the rural woodland. And you don't see it, well, wherever, yeah, that it's just not, it doesn't seem compatible. with the neighborhood.
Well, I
what's
think,
going
you
on.
know, ask them, give me examples in your neighborhood.
But if we get rid of this, do we have another section where you can say?
No, I mean, but I don't think you should take it out. I think there should be some,
Cause I think there's situations like that there is a, compatibility.
Yeah, well, I guess what I'm saying is finding areas in the ordinance where that compatibility question is more appropriately asked. I don't know where that is yet, but I'm just telling you, it needs to happen at some point. I'm not sure I'm gonna spend all my time on it the remainder of this year.
But I think it makes sense to put it
Just
in
gotta be in
where
the
it's
queue.
more meaningful.
Yeah. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
and it's just that each situation's kind of unique, or each situation can be unique, so there's sort of a. Like what you're talking
Yes.
about, like there are parameters which. I don't know, like I thought like, do we wanna have, if you max out the amount of lot coverage you have with. Structure, like building structure, as opposed to terraces. Should we have a percentage that you're allowed to have a height or something, so that it's just simply not I think the code's written to like, how tall would you wanna build a building? We wanna allow people to do what they wanna do. How much building
no,
do
you
you wanna
you
build?
got height limitations,
But you
and
can,
lot
but
coverage.
then going to max out your lot, max out your height. Is of the, more of the financial, like, let's just make as much money, or, developer, or whatever, there are some things. That people come at about not being so attractive, and it seems to me that those developers just went to max the lot, max the height. To get the biggest building on there as possible, and
Yeah, that's a lengthy design standards, conversation.
I guess I was thinking, if you
Form-based.
if you go to the maximum lot coverage, do you have some sort of like, well, if you max out your lot coverage, you can only do 15% of the, well, I guess it was, I don't know, some way to have some restraint against the height, or
Yes,
some way so that you can't just in all directions max out the code.
Yep.
I don't feel like the code's meant to be handled that way.
yep,
It's supposed to allow people to do what they want to do.
yes. There's form-based codes that would think about that.
Yeah.
I don't think they're good for everywhere, but it's definitely something to consider. Especially in like the village.
It's like the old 30% rule, oh, even before.
Right, yeah.
All right. So, Kim and I had a meeting earlier. Last week, was it already, was it last week?
Yeah.
God. And yeah, so there's a long list of things that I'll be cranking out, warrant articles. Some of them are just checking the boxes like, we need to make sure we have the appropriate language in the land use ordinance for, certificates of occupancy. Just to help clarify what Kim already does. And we have a draft, language about, solar stuff, which is one I know you brought up, Joe. That, I was working on today. Kim's already done a little drafting on that. I've started working on it. I want to check in with the Climate to Thrive on that, because I know there's some stuff that relates to the town's work that's happened and currently happening,
Well,
so,
I know that was concerns of a couple of people, so I had
Yep.
solo language in the ordinance.
yeah.
What is that, Deb?
It's like
Just
large,
draft right at the moment, but
yeah, I was actually gonna bring it tonight, but I wasn't quite happy with it, so.
The solar farms.
Just solar farms, not like, so I think there'll be,
Yeah,
there's
like-
like different levels of solar, and one of them, like, you put it on
low,
your house.
medium,
or-
high density.
Yeah, it's more about solar farms.
Person isn't gonna let us do any of it anymore.
Perfect,
Perfect.
that's right, it's all about capacity now, huh? But I don't think we're all talking about things that you wanna do, like maximizing your already existing roofs, for example, with solar is different than creating a whole solar farm, like they did in Bar Harbor, or they wanted to do in Bar Harbor. And maybe it isn't, I don't know, we just have to have some rules to look at, that's what we're doing.
I've been saying for a number of years that we should have, at least I kept coming across things saying your town should have something to protect the
Yep.
people's right to put up solar panels that your neighbor can't put up a building that blocks out the sunlight out here.
Yep. I think that's something that's in the subdivision ordinance that we had as a,
I suppose to direct comment.
yep,
Mm,
anyway,
That's what that's supposed to be.
yeah. That's the whole point. It's not because you want to protect light coming into your window.
Well, it would be nice to be able to
Yeah.
protect, like, I mean, solar gains and the, on the building are as much
Yeah,
benefit as actually producing electricity.
that's why it's there for that conversation. I also really think we needed a site plan review ordinance instead of just a subdivision ordinance, but that's next year's job.
We've been saying that for years.
It's so true. You definitely need one. Yeah,
What-
Subdivision's
and what
really
is it
funky.
that you're s-
so if we're talking about like doing an apartment building, and that would be a subdivision review, but that's a clunky way of approving a project, like where you say, hey, I've got this 3 or 4 unit apartment building on a smaller lot, like what we were just talking about, like going through a subdivision review is really geared toward land divisions.
Mhm.
And so it's a real clunky way to approve subdivisions, when you should do a site plan review, which is much more geared in those situations, which is much more geared toward
one side.
a site, but you know, the things that you're focused on are parking and vehicular circulation and lighting and, you know, landscaping, buffering, those kinds of things that aren't as easy to kind of get to in the subdivision ordinance.
Do you have a baseline that you could just throw out?
I haven't even drafted one up, but yeah, we could
There
get,
isn't just one from another town?
there's a
So, like, here's
definitely,
baseline.
there's some models that we should be looking at, yeah.
Cause, yeah, it's getting really painful going through.
It is, yeah.
These site reviews.
But it's like,
It's
even things, I think I remember, I really was thinking about this several years ago when you guys were going over the canopy change at like, was it at the one stop or somewhere, right?
Oh, the one stop can,
Yeah, I'm like-
yeah. I was thinking it can't be at the restaurant.
Or whatever you're doing, like you have a restaurant coming to town, or you have a hotel that's getting rebuilt or whatever, like that's a site plan review. It's not even a conditional use permit. It's something different, you know? Anyway. Keep adding stuff to my list. I don't like it.
I'd like another division to the subdivision for
The
smaller,
subdivision.
small subdivisions, that you don't have to bring in a 3-lane highway to put in 3 houses on one lot.
Yeah, road standards that are different.
Road standards for
Yep.
different sizes, because it's having a real, there are many places you can look around town where it has a real impact off the Whitney Farm Road. Everybody laughs about the guy who had to put in that great big wide driveway entrance because that was the subdivision
Mhm.
ordinance.
Yep.
Why did you have to do this?
Oh, now you're getting into good stuff, road standards. Yes. We gotta talk about that too, in the context of the subdivision ordinance. But not tonight, Jerry. Yeah, I know, I'm agreeing with you. All right, so I am actually gonna try to start cranking things out in warrant article format, more fast and furious,
I will not be available Thursday,
okay?
so don't crank anything out to me that
I won't
day.
be there, yes, I'm gonna be working on it on Thursday.
What you doing? Maybe have a Thanksgiving.
When will we see the short-term rental ordinance that's being created by the subgroup?
Good question. December?
That's what they were shooting at,
Yeah,
Okay,
because
maybe January?
when you we're trying to get the thing in
I'm working.
for next year. Yeah.
Because once you get past that, then you're really starting to get into the meat.
And December is next week, I think.
What?
yeah.
It is?
Hurt near.
It runs for 30
I'm good.
days, so you're in- There is some
Now, stop.
wiggle room.
Be serious.
Yeah. Nobody's gonna do December 1st.
It will not be next week,
No.
December, yeah.
Other than that, it gives you a 3-week window.
Christmas present,
Ho, ho, ho.
That would be a nice Christmas present.
it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
Can't wait. All right, anything else? We good?
Good. Motion to adjourn?
You got it.
All in favor?
One more thing.
Yes, sir.
Have a good
You know,
Thanksgiving,
story.
everyone.
Story Litchfield.
Yes.
Yeah.
She has a situation now, I'm gonna have a committee here,
Okay.
and so she doesn't know. If I would be home, I would just be watching super car and boat videos, so it doesn't, you know,
Might as well be out doing
it,
something.
it gets me out of the house, it's
Nice.
wonderful.